Blood trickled down Maya Washington's wrists as the handcuffs cut into her skin. "That's my car," she repeated, her judicial robe now soaked in rain. The white officer smirked. "Sure it is, sweetheart." Neither knew this moment would eventually topple Chicago's entire police department. If you're just tuning in to this shocking story of injustice and redemption, I want to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe to join our community of justice seekers. Can a single moment of discrimination really bring down an entire corrupt system? Let's find out as we dive into this incredible, true story of power, prejudice, and one woman's fight to transform the system from within. Superior Court Judge Maya Washington stepped out of Milligan's, an upscale restaurant in downtown Chicago's financial district, the satisfaction of her landmark ruling against Westbrook Industries' discriminatory hiring practices still warming her despite the sudden downpour that greeted her. The 42-year-old jurist pulled her coat tighter around her judicial robes, which she hadn't had time to change out of after the late running case, and hurried across the rain-slicked parking lot toward her pearl-white Tesla Model S parked under a flickering streetlight at the far end, where she'd found the only available space 3 hours earlier. The rain intensified, drumming against the asphalt and soaking through her clothes as she reached for the key fob in her purse, pressing the unlock button several times with no response. "Battery must be dead," she muttered, fishing out her backup physical key to manually unlock the driver's door. Unbeknownst to Maya, Officer Richard Dawson sat in his patrol car across the street, having just finished his coffee break at the 24-hour diner that offered free meals to uniformed officers. The 35-year-old officer, whose personnel file contained 17 excessive force complaints, all filed by black residents from the South Side neighborhoods he patrolled, narrowed his eyes as he spotted Maya approaching the luxury vehicle. He watched her struggle with the door for a moment before starting his engine, suspicion hardening his features into a scowl. "Not in this neighborhood," he said to himself, flipping on his lights, but not his siren as he pulled across the street, toward the parking lot. Maya had just managed to unlock her car door when the patrol car's headlights illuminated her, momentarily blinding her as Officer Dawson emerged, one hand resting casually on his holstered weapon. "Step away from the vehicle, ma'am!" he called out, approaching with the practiced swagger that had intimidated countless civilians in his 12 years on the force. Maya turned slowly, instinctively keeping her hands visible, the physical key still clutched in her right hand. "Officer, this is my car," she explained calmly, the professional composure that had earned her respect in the courtroom automatically engaging. "I'm just having trouble with the remote key." Dawson closed the distance between them, looking pointedly from Maya to the luxury vehicle and back again, skepticism evident in every line of his face. "Registration and ID," he demanded without preamble, not bothering to introduce himself or explain why he was questioning her. Maya nodded, reaching carefully toward her purse. "My registration is in the glove compartment, and my ID is in my wallet. I'm Judge Maya Washington from the Superior Court." Dawson's expression shifted, a fleeting surprise quickly replaced by deeper suspicion. "Judge, huh? And I'm the mayor," he scoffed, his tone making it clear he didn't believe her. Funny how everybody's somebody important when they're caught doing something they shouldn't. Maya felt a familiar knot form in her stomach, the same sensation she'd experienced countless times throughout her life when her achievements and identity were questioned because of her skin color. "Officer, I can show you my credentials if you'll allow me to reach into my purse," she said, maintaining her composure even as anger began to simmer beneath her professional veneer. A small crowd of diners had begun to gather at the restaurant's windows, several holding up phones to record the interaction. "That's an $80,000 car," Dawson remarked, ignoring her request to retrieve her ID. "Seems a little excessive for a public servant's salary, doesn't it? Unless there's something you're not telling me about how judges make their money." The implication was clear, and Maya felt her patience wearing thin. "I've been on the bench for 11 years, officer, and I managed a successful private practice before that. Now, would you like to see my identification or not?" Dawson's radio crackled with a dispatcher's voice, but he ignored it, taking a step closer to Maya. "Put your hands behind your back," he ordered suddenly, reaching for his handcuffs. "This is ridiculous," Maya protested, her professional calm finally cracking. "I've told you this is my vehicle. You have no probable cause." Dawson moved quickly, grabbing Maya's wrist and twisting her arm behind her back with practiced efficiency. "Resisting an officer now, are we? That's a separate charge." Maya gasped as the cold metal of the handcuffs bit into her skin, tightened with deliberate excess.
Force.
"You're making a serious mistake," she said through gritted teeth, as Dawson secured the second cuff, the metal cutting into her wrists. "I want your badge number and name immediately." Blood began to trickle from where the handcuffs had broken, her skin staining the sleeve of her judicial robe. A voice called out from the direction of the restaurant. "Maya, what on earth is happening here?" Judge Thomas Wilson, a 64-year-old white colleague from the bench, hurried across the parking lot, his dinner companions watching from the doorway. "Tom," Maya acknowledged, relief and humiliation warring in her voice. "This officer seems to think I'm stealing my own car." Wilson's face reddened with indignation as he turned to Dawson. "Officer, I can personally vouch for Judge Washington. She is indeed who she claims to be, and you are making an egregious error right now." Dawson hesitated, looking between the two judges, clearly calculating his options now that a white authority figure had entered the equation. "There have been several car thefts in this area," he said defensively, but his hand moved toward the handcuff keys. "I was simply responding to suspicious activity." Wilson's expression made it clear he wasn't buying the explanation. "Remove those handcuffs immediately. This is completely unacceptable." With obvious reluctance, Dawson unlocked the cuffs, his movements deliberately slow as Maya winced from the pain in her wrists. "My apologies for the misunderstanding, Your Honor," he said, not sounding remotely apologetic. Wilson placed a supportive hand on Maya's shoulder. "We should report this, Maya. This kind of behavior cannot stand." Maya rubbed her bleeding wrists, staring directly at Dawson's nameplate for the first time. "Officer Dawson, I'll need your full name, badge number, and precinct information." Something dangerous flashed in Dawson's eyes, a momentary glimpse of the true person behind the badge. "Of course, Judge Washington, but you know, Chicago streets aren't always safe for everyone, especially after dark. Be careful out there." The threat was subtle but unmistakable, delivered with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Wilson started to protest, but Maya silenced him with a look. She'd heard threats before, had faced down worse in her courtroom. This officer had no idea who he was dealing with, but he would learn, and so would every other officer who thought. A badge gave them the right to humiliate and threaten people based on the color of their skin. Maya's hands trembled slightly as she inserted her key into the lock of her Hyde Park apartment, the adrenaline that had sustained her through the confrontation finally beginning to ebb, leaving exhaustion and a deep, simmering anger in its wake. The modern furnishings of her home, usually a source of comfort and pride, seemed suddenly hollow as she dropped her purse on the marble countertop and made her way to the bathroom, wincing as she examined her injured wrists under the harsh vanity lights. The cuts weren't deep, but they were surrounded by darkening bruises where the metal had dug into her skin, and dried blood caked the edges of the wounds. Maya carefully cleaned the injuries, applying antiseptic and bandages before taking several photographs from different angles with her phone, documenting the physical evidence of Dawson's excessive force. As she moved through her nighttime routine on autopilot, Maya found herself transported back to childhood memories she'd tried to leave behind, her father's car being pulled over for no reason other than driving through a white neighborhood, the humiliating searches, the casual cruelty of officers who saw their family not as citizens to protect but as threats to contain. "The system only changes when challenged from within," her father had told her after one such incident, planting the seed that would eventually lead her to law school and the judiciary. "Remember that, Maya." The ringing of her phone startled her from her reverie, her assistant Andrea Coleman's name flashing on the screen. "Maya, are you okay?" Andrea asked without preamble. "I just saw a video online of you being handcuffed in a parking lot. It's already going viral." Maya sank onto her couch, closing her eyes briefly. "I'm physically fine, Andrea, humiliated and angry, but fine." She opened her laptop and followed the link Andrea texted her, watching with a strange sense of detachment. As the scene played out from a bystander's perspective, her professional demeanor, Dawson's aggressive posturing, the handcuffs, Wilson's intervention. The comments section was already filling with outrage, support, and the inevitable racist trolling. "This is beyond unacceptable," Andrea continued, her voice tight with controlled fury. "You need to file a complaint immediately. That officer had no right." A knock at the door interrupted Andrea's words. "Someone's here, Andrea. I'll call you back." Maya approached the door cautiously, checking the peephole to see her brother Marcus standing in the hallway, his expression a storm of concern and barely contained rage. "I saw the video," he said as soon as she opened the door, pulling her into a careful hug before examining her wrists with a low whistle. "This is exactly what I've been talking about for years, Maya. This is why my organization keeps pushing for police accountability." Marcus, 4 years her junior at 38, had chosen a different path from his sister, becoming a community organizer focused on police reform rather than working within the system. The siblings had often clashed over their differing approaches to fighting injustice. "You know how many times I've seen this happen in our communities?" Marcus continued, pacing her living room like a caged tiger. "The difference is most folks don't have a white judge colleague to step in, and they end up in jail or worse." His words stung with truth Maya couldn't deny. "What are you going to do about it?" he challenged. "You're in a position of power. Maya, you can actually make something happen here." Maya's thoughts turned to the police misconduct cases that had come before her court over the years, cases she'd approached with what she'd believed was impartial judgment, giving officers the benefit of the doubt when evidence seemed inconclusive. Had she been blind to patterns she should have recognized? Had her desire to appear unbiased actually enabled the very system that had just humiliated her? "I need to look into this officer's background," she said finally, moving to her home office with Marcus following. A quick database search revealed what she feared. Officer Richard Dawson had accumulated 17 excessive force complaints over his career, all filed by black residents, all dismissed without serious investigation. Further digging showed a disturbing pattern. Dawson was part of a unit commanded by Captain James Reynolds, whose officers collectively had the highest number of use-of-force incidents in the city, yet the lowest rate of disciplinary action. "This goes deeper than one bad officer," Maya murmured, staring at the screen. "There's systematic protection happening here." Her phone rang again. Chief Justice Peterson, her superior on the bench. "Maya, I've just heard about your unfortunate encounter this evening," he began, his tone carefully diplomatic. "A most regrettable misunderstanding, I'm sure." Maya's grip tightened on the phone. "It wasn't a misunderstanding, sir. It was racial profiling and excessive force, plain and simple." A weighted pause followed. "These situations are always more complex than they appear, Maya. I trust you'll handle this discreetly. The court's reputation must remain above reproach, especially in these politically charged times." The implication was clear. Pursuing the matter would create problems not just for her, but for the entire judiciary. "I'll take that under advisement," Maya replied neutrally, ending the call before turning to find Marcus watching her with knowing eyes. "Let me guess, they want you to let it slide, for the greater good, right?" Maya didn't answer, walking instead to the photograph of her father on her desk, Carlton Washington in his prime, addressing a civil rights rally in the 60s, his expression fierce with righteous determination. What would he think of his daughter now, at this crossroads? Would he recognize the woman who'd climbed so high in the system that she'd started to view injustice through its distorted lens? The cut on her wrist throbbed, a physical reminder of what happened when theory met reality, when the abstract notion of racial profiling became handcuffs cutting into your own skin. Maya reached for her phone again, scrolling through her contacts, until she found the number she was looking for. "Zoe Chen, this is Judge Maya Washington. You once approached me about investigating police misconduct in Chicago. I declined to help you then. I'm calling to rectify that mistake." She met her brother's surprised gaze with newfound resolve. "I'm ready to fight, but we need more than my word against his. We need to expose the entire system." The corner cafe in Wicker Park existed in a perfect neutral zone, far enough from both the courthouse and police headquarters to avoid unwanted attention, yet public enough to ensure safety in numbers. Maya arrived 15 minutes early, selecting a table with a clear view of both the entrance and the back exit, her judicial instincts for managing risk, transferring seamlessly to her new reality as a whistleblower. Zoe Chen entered precisely on time, the investigative journalist scanning the room with practiced efficiency before sliding into the seat across from Maya, her laptop bag clutched protectively against her side. "I didn't expect to hear from you." "Judge Washington," Zoe admitted, ordering black coffee when the server approached, "especially after you shut down my questions about the West Side police shootings last year." Maya winced slightly at the reminder. "I believed in maintaining judicial impartiality," she said, absently touching the still healing cuts on her wrist. "Recent events have adjusted my perspective." Zoe's expression softened marginally. "I saw the video. For what it's worth, I'm sorry that happened to you, though I'm not sorry if it's opened your eyes." The journalist opened her laptop, revealing a meticulously organized database of police incidents. "I've been tracking patterns for 3 years now. Specific officers, specific neighborhoods, specific demographics of victims. The data tells a clear story, but I need credible sources willing to go on record. That's where you come in." Maya leaned forward, studying the screen. "And I need someone who knows how to investigate properly. That's where you come in." Their alliance formed with that simple exchange. Maya offering legal expertise and the credibility of her position, Zoe contributing investigative skills and years of research. They spent 2 hours outlining a strategy, agreeing to communicate through encrypted channels and meet only in public locations that wouldn't raise suspicions. As Maya left the cafe, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Judges should stay in their courtrooms, not the streets. She froze momentarily, scanning the busy sidewalk for watching eyes before deleting the message and hailing a taxi rather than walking to her car as she'd planned. The atmosphere in the courthouse the next morning was subtly altered, like air, pressure dropping before a storm. Colleagues who normally greeted Maya warmly now offered tight smiles or sudden fascination with their shoes. Judge Morris, who had mentored Maya when she first joined the bench, made a point of inviting her to lunch in the private judicial dining room. "Everyone's talking about that unfortunate incident," Morris said once they were seated, her voice lowered, despite the room being reserved exclusively for judges. "Such a misunderstanding. I hope you're not dwelling on it." Maya set down her fork. "It wasn't a misunderstanding, Sandra. It was racial profiling, pure and simple." Morris's smile remained fixed, but her eyes cooled. "You've always been so level-headed, Maya. That's why everyone respects you. Don't let one regrettable encounter change that." The conversation shifted to safer topics, but the message had been delivered. Pursuing this matter would cost Maya collegial support. After lunch, Maya used her judicial access to review police misconduct cases from the past 5 years, searching for patterns she might have missed. The statistics painted a disturbing picture. Cases involving officers from Captain Reynolds' units were 40% more likely to be dismissed before reaching serious investigation, and complaints against Officer Dawson specifically had been buried under procedural technicalities or simply marked insufficient evidence despite witness statements or even video documentation. Maya needed someone with inside knowledge of how these cases were handled internally. She reached out to Terrell Jackson, a former law school classmate now working in internal affairs, inviting him for coffee with the pretext of discussing a judicial mentoring program for minority officers. "I can't be seen talking to you about this," Terrell said tensely, once they were seated in a busy Starbucks far from both their workplaces. "You have no idea what kind of heat you're generating, Maya." She slid a folder across the table. "These statistics tell me someone's protecting certain officers. I need to know how the system works from the inside, Terrell." He didn't touch the folder, his eyes darting nervously around the coffee shop. "They call it the blue wall for a reason, Maya. Evidence disappears, witnesses change statements, body cam footage gets corrupted, and anyone who questions it finds themselves responding to domestic disputes in the worst neighborhoods at 3 a.m., if they're lucky." Before Maya could press further, Terrell's phone buzzed. He checked it, his expression darkening. I need to go. Don't contact me again directly. He stood, then hesitated. Look into Captain Reynolds, but be careful. Back in her chambers that afternoon, Maya was reviewing case files when her assistant knocked, looking uncomfortable. Judge Washington, Captain Reynolds is here to see you. He says it's urgent. Maya's pulse quickened, but she nodded calmly. Send him in, Andrea. Captain James Reynolds entered with the confident stride of a man accustomed to authority, his uniform pressed to perfection, his smile practiced but not reaching his eyes. Judge Washington, thank you for seeing me without an appointment. I wanted to personally express my sincere apologies for the unfortunate incident with Officer Dawson. Maya gestured to the chair across from her desk. Unfortunate incident? Is that what we're calling racial profiling and excessive force now, Captain? Reynolds' smile tightened fractionally. I assure you the officer's actions are under review. We take these matters very seriously. He leaned forward slightly. However, I'm concerned about rumors that you're conducting some sort of personal investigation into departmental matters. Maya activated the voice recording app on her phone beneath her desk. I'm reviewing cases that have come before my court, Captain. That's well within my purview. Reynolds nodded slowly. Of course, though I would hate to see your reputation affected by the appearance of a conflict of interest. Your recent rulings could be called into question if it seemed you had a personal agenda against law enforcement. The threat was expertly veiled, but unmistakable. Maya maintained eye contact, refusing to be intimidated. Was there anything else, Captain? He stood, straightening his already immaculate uniform. Just a friendly word of caution, Judge. Chicago can be a dangerous city. We all need to be careful. After he left, Maya played back the recording, capturing the subtle threats beneath. The professional veneer. That evening, Zoe texted an urgent update. She had discovered Officer Dawson belonged to a private Facebook group where officers shared racist content and discussed teaching lessons to uppity residents in gentrifying neighborhoods. Maya forwarded the information to her secure email just as she reached the courthouse parking garage, stopping short when she saw her Tesla. All 4 tires had been slashed and a crude drawing of a gavel had been keyed into the driver's door. Security cameras that should have captured the vandalism were mysteriously offline for routine maintenance. As she waited for roadside assistance, her phone rang. Judge Wilson calling from his lake house in Wisconsin. Maya, I heard you're stirring up trouble, he said without preamble. Good, it's about time someone did. She was momentarily speechless. Tom, I thought you'd be telling me to let it go, like everyone else. Wilson sighed heavily. I'm retiring. Next month, Maya. 34 years on the bench, and do you know what keeps me awake at night? Not the cases I got wrong, but the injustices I saw and did nothing about. I was there that night. I saw how that officer treated you before he knew who you were. That's how they treat our fellow citizens every day, and we in the judiciary have been complicit with our silence. His words struck a chord Maya hadn't expected. Why are you telling me this now, Tom? Because I can't fight anymore, but you can, and you'll need allies. Be careful who you trust, Maya. This goes deeper than you know. After ending the call, Maya drove her loaner car home, noticing an unmarked police cruiser parked half a block. From her building, not hiding but making its presence known, inside her apartment, she installed a new security system she'd purchased that afternoon, setting up motion sensors and cameras that would alert her phone if anyone approached her door. As she finished, her computer chimed with an encrypted email from an anonymous sender. The message contained only a file attachment labeled, "For Judge Washington." Inside was a document titled, "Community Correction Initiative," with a list of names, addresses, and vehicles, successful black professionals, living in gentrifying neighborhoods, marked for special attention during patrols. Maya's name and vehicle information had been added to the list 3 months earlier. Are you paying attention to the signs of corruption hiding in plain sight? Do you believe Maya is right to investigate, despite the risks to her career and safety? Comment number 1 if you think she should push forward with exposing the truth no matter the cost. Or number 2, if you think she should protect herself and find a safer way to seek justice. This system of targeted harassment isn't just fiction. Similar patterns have been documented in police departments across the country. Like this video if you believe accountability is essential in law enforcement, and subscribe to follow Maya's dangerous journey as she digs deeper into the conspiracy. What do you think Captain Reynolds' next move will be, now that Maya has evidence of the targeting program? The stakes are about to get much higher as we continue this true story of courage against corruption. The morning sunlight streaming through the courthouse windows did nothing to dispel the chill Maya felt as she entered the judicial wing, the subtle shift in colleagues' behavior now glaringly obvious. Conversations that stopped abruptly when she approached, sympathetic glances quickly averted, the growing isolation that came with challenging the status quo. Chief Justice Peterson's assistant intercepted her before she reached her chambers, face carefully neutral as she delivered the summons to his office. At your earliest convenience, the polite phrasing doing nothing to disguise the imperative. Peterson's corner office overlooked Grant Park, the expansive view a reminder of his position at the apex of the judicial hierarchy, a position he'd held for 15 years through careful political maneuvering and strategic non-confrontation. "Maya," he greeted her without rising from behind his imposing desk, gesturing to the chair across from him. "I hoped we wouldn't need to have this conversation, but your actions leave me no choice." He slid a folder toward her containing printouts of her database searches. Her meeting with Zoe Chen captured from a distance by a telephoto lens, and a transcript of her conversation with Terrell Jackson. "You're under surveillance," Maya realized. Aloud, the violation sending anger coursing through her veins. Peterson's expression remained impassive. "The police department has expressed concerns about your objectivity in cases involving law enforcement. Given your personal experience, I'm recommending you recuse yourself from all such cases until this matter is resolved." Maya's spine straightened, the judicial authority she'd earned through 11 years of exemplary service hardening her voice. "With all due respect, sir, that would violate judicial independence. There's no legitimate basis for recusal, and I'll continue to hear all cases assigned to me according to the law and my oath of office." Peterson's mask of collegial concern slipped momentarily, revealing the calculation beneath. "Be reasonable. Maya, your career has such promise, don't throw it away on a personal vendetta." Maya stood, her decision made. "Is there anything else, Chief Justice?" Back in her chambers, Maya discovered her upcoming docket had been altered without her knowledge or consent. Police-related cases reassigned to other judges despite her refusal to recuse herself, a direct challenge to her judicial authority that would have been unthinkable just days earlier. Andrea knocked tentatively on her open door, closing it behind her before speaking in a hushed voice. "I overheard Judge Morris and Judge Kellerman discussing you in the break room. They're talking about a competency review, suggesting your judgment has been compromised by trauma from the incident." The betrayal stung, especially from Sandra Morris, who had championed Maya's career from the beginning. Before Maya could respond, her phone rang, Marcus calling with barely controlled fury in his voice. "I just got pulled over 3 blocks from my apartment. 2 officers, hands on weapons, made me lie on the ground while they searched my car. They said they were looking for drugs, but one of them whispered, 'Tell your sister to back off,' before they let me go." The retaliation was expanding beyond Maya herself, targeting her family in a clear escalation meant to force her retreat. That evening, Zoe called with more disturbing news. "Someone broke into my apartment while I was at work. They took my laptop and the external drives with my research, but I had everything backed up to encrypted cloud storage they couldn't access." The noose was tightening around them, Maya realized, as she checked the new security cameras she'd installed, half expecting to find them disabled. Sleep eluded her that night, her mind racing through potential moves and counter-moves in this dangerous chess match, doubts creeping in during the vulnerable hours before dawn. Was she putting others at risk for her own crusade? Was the system too entrenched to change? The morning brought no clarity, only exhaustion, and the memory of law school struggles that now seemed prophetic. The professor who suggested she might be more comfortable in family court, despite her excellence in criminal procedure, the study, groups that somehow never had room for her. The constant need to be twice as prepared, twice as articulate, twice as perfect as her white counterparts, just to be taken seriously. Her mother called as Maya was preparing for court, her voice tight. With anxiety, "Marcus told me what's happening. Baby, please be careful. These people play by different rules. Your father would understand if you stepped back." The mention of her father prompted Maya to cancel her morning appointments and drive to Grace Baptist Church in Bronzeville, where Carlton Washington had once preached fiery sermons about justice and righteousness during the civil rights movement. The old sanctuary was quiet on a weekday morning, dust motes dancing in the colored light filtering through stained glass, but the memories of her father's voice echoed in the empty space, strengthening her resolve. An elderly woman emerged from a side door, moving slowly with the aid of a cane. "Judge Washington, I thought that was you. I'm Mrs. Johnson. I used to sing in your daddy's choir." Her weathered face crinkled in a smile that faded as she noticed Maya's expression. "You got troubles, child. I can see it plain as day." Something about the woman's gentle perception broke through Maya's careful composure, and she found herself sharing the whole story: the handcuffs, the investigation, the escalating retaliation. Mrs. Johnson nodded slowly, unsurprised. "They did the same to my Walter back in '68. Police chief himself pulled him over every day for a month after Walter filed a complaint about officers beating our neighbor boy. Nothing new under the sun." She patted Maya's hand with gnarled fingers. "Difference is you got power they didn't expect. That's why they're scared." Back at her office, Maya expanded her investigation, identifying 3 other successful black professionals targeted by Officer Dawson and his colleagues: Dr. Elaine Forrester, a cardiothoracic surgeon; Professor James Baldwin, chair of economics at Northwestern; and Darius Taylor, CEO of a tech startup. All had experienced similar mistaken identity stops, excessive force, or unexplained vandalism. All agreed to meet with Maya and potentially testify about their experiences, though Taylor withdrew 2 days later after his company received an unexpected tax audit and his primary investor was pulled over for erratic driving. The pressure continued to mount from unexpected directions. Maya received a call from Harrington and Pierce, an elite law firm known for representing powerful corporate and political clients. "We've been following your career with interest, Judge Washington," the managing partner said smoothly. "We're expanding our litigation department and believe you'd be a perfect fit. Starting compensation would be 7 figures, of course." The implied escape route was tempting in her moments of greatest doubt. Walk away from the fight, take the prestigious private sector job, protect herself and her family. The tipping point came unexpectedly when Bethany Reynolds, Captain Reynolds' wife, approached Maya after yoga class, her eyes darting nervously as she whispered, "Please be careful around James. When he feels threatened, he becomes unpredictable. I've seen what happens to people who cross him." Before Maya could respond, Bethany hurried away, leaving Maya to wonder if she'd just received a warning or a potential ally. That night, Maya installed a panic button system connected directly to private security, the latest in a series of precautions that now dominated her daily routine. As she finished testing the system, her phone chimed with a text containing an image: a dead bird lying on her courthouse desk chair, a handwritten note visible beside it reading, "Birds that sing too loud don't last long." The message was clear. They had access to her most secure spaces, and they were watching her every move. The intimidation was escalating from threats to action, and Maya knew the next steps would be critical in determining whether she could expose the truth or become another silenced victim of the system she was fighting to reform. The conference room at Zoe's newspaper office became their war room, walls covered with photographs, timelines, and connection charts mapping the web of officers, incidents, and cover-ups they'd uncovered. Maya and Zoe worked methodically through their growing list of victims, conducting interviews in secure locations, building a comprehensive database that revealed patterns invisible when viewed as isolated incidents. Dr. Forrester described being handcuffed on the hood of her Mercedes after a late-night emergency surgery, the responding officers claiming her hospital ID was fake, despite calls from the chief of surgery confirming her identity. Professor Baldwin recounted being dragged from his car during a traffic stop, forced to sit on the curb, While officers found marijuana that mysteriously disappeared before he reached the station, charges dropped only after his university president intervened. Each story followed similar contours: successful black professionals targeted in predictable patterns, escalating harassment, evidence that disappeared, complaints that vanished into administrative black holes. "We need to focus on systemic patterns rather than individual incidents," Meyer explained as they refined their strategy. "Going after individual officers like Dawson would be satisfying but ultimately ineffective. We need to prove departmental policies and practices enable and protect this behavior." Zoe nodded in agreement, adding another document to their evidence wall. "That's how we avoid the few bad apples defense that protects the institution." Their approach evolved to target the department's policies, training, supervision, and complaint investigation procedures. The infrastructure that allowed discrimination to flourish rather than the symptomatic behavior of individual officers. Meyer spent evenings researching similar cases from other jurisdictions, particularly Cincinnati and Baltimore, where pattern or practice litigation had successfully forced departmental reforms. Their breakthrough came from an unexpected source: a message in their secure tip line from someone identifying only as Officer X, providing internal documents showing how complaint investigations were systematically undermined, including a training presentation for supervisors on managing difficult community members that outlined strategies for discrediting complainants based on past interactions with law enforcement, financial history, or social media content. The documents were authentic, containing watermarks and metadata that proved they came from inside the department. "Do you think it could be Reynolds's wife?" Meyer asked, recalling Bethany's cryptic warning. "The timing fits, and she seemed genuinely afraid of him." Zoe examined the metadata. "Possibly, though it could be any officer with access to the training server. Either way, we have our first police whistleblower." The evidence mounted as Officer X continued providing information, internal emails showing Captain Reynolds intervening, in misconduct investigations, training materials with coded language targeting urban elements in gentrifying neighborhoods, and patrol assignments deliberately concentrating certain officers in areas with growing black professional populations. A social media campaign coalesced organically around Meyer's story, as more victims shared their experiences online with the hashtag #BehindTheGavel, creating visibility that provided both protection and vulnerability. The police union responded, predictably issuing a statement condemning activist judges who pursue personal vendettas at the expense of public safety, and specifically naming Meyer as compromised by bias. The department's counterattack escalated when Meyer received notice of a judicial misconduct hearing based on allegations she had improperly accessed confidential police records and demonstrated bias against law enforcement that renders her unfit to preside over criminal cases. The evidence presented against her included selectively edited database search records and manufactured emails allegedly showing Meyer promising favorable rulings to anti-police activists. Judge Wilson emerged from retirement to testify on Meyer's behalf, his distinguished career and reputation adding crucial credibility to her defense. "I was present during the incident that precipitated Judge Washington's concerns," he testified, his voice steady despite his age. "What I witnessed was not a misunderstanding, but a clear case of racial profiling and excessive force against a sitting judge. If that's how officers behave when they know they're being observed interacting with a judicial officer, one can only imagine their conduct with ordinary citizens when they believe no one of consequence is watching." The hearing. Room fell silent at his words, the five-judge panel exchanging uncomfortable glances. Wilson continued, "In my 34 years on the bench, I have never witnessed a more professional, fair-minded jurist than Meyer Washington. The suggestion that she is biased against law enforcement is not merely incorrect, but appears to be a retaliatory attempt to silence legitimate inquiry into troubling patterns of conduct." Despite Wilson's powerful testimony, the judicial board split 3-2, issuing a caution that allowed Meyer to continue serving but placed a formal reprimand in her file. A half measure that satisfied neither side, but kept her in position to continue her fight. Zoe published the first article in her investigative series the following day, methodically laying out the evidence of systematic targeting while carefully protecting sources and withholding certain details for subsequent pieces. The department's attorneys immediately threatened a defamation lawsuit, though the carefully fact-checked article gave them little actual leverage. Marcus organized a community support rally outside the courthouse, bringing together victims of police misconduct, civil rights organizations, and community members in a visible show of solidarity that made the evening news and further raised the profile of their investigation. The most surprising development came when Officer Kelly Martinez, a young white female officer from Dawson's unit, contacted Maya through their secure channel. "I can't be part of this anymore," she wrote. "They're training us to target specific people, specific neighborhoods. I joined to protect and serve, not to harass innocent people because of their skin color or address." Martinez provided testimony about the unofficial training practices new officers received, how to provoke reactions that justified force, how to write reports that protected officers from complaints, which residents were considered problems, to be managed. Within hours of agreeing to go on record, Martinez was suspended for violation of departmental confidentiality policies and received threatening texts from fellow officers calling her a traitor. As Maya and Zoe dug deeper into financial records, they discovered troubling connections between the police union's political action committee and judicial campaign funding, including substantial contributions to 3 of the judges who had voted on Maya's disciplinary hearing, none of which had been disclosed as potential conflicts. More disturbing was the pattern of real estate development following increased police activity in certain neighborhoods, property values dropping after sustained police attention, followed by opportunistic purchases by development companies, including Harrington Ventures, owned by Victor Harrington, a major donor to the current mayor and the Police Benevolent Association. Captain Reynolds held a press conference portraying himself as the victim of a coordinated smear campaign by anti-police elements and defending his department's proactive community policing strategies in transitional neighborhoods, the carefully coded language doing little to disguise the racial implications of the policies. That evening, Maya received another encrypted message. "Loading dock behind the old Palmer printing building. Midnight tomorrow. Come alone if you want the truth about Dawson and Reynolds. I have everything you need to bring them down." Maya stared at the message, weighing the obvious risk against the potential breakthrough. After everything they'd uncovered, she knew this was likely either a trap or the key evidence they needed, and there was only one way to find out which. Do you think Maya should meet this mysterious source alone, or is this a dangerous trap set by her enemies? Comment number 1 if you believe she should go with backup, or number 2 if you think she needs to follow the instructions exactly to gain the source's trust. This investigation has uncovered layers of corruption that extend far beyond one officer's actions, touching real estate developers, judicial funding, and systematic targeting of successful black professionals. Like this video if you're shocked by how deep institutional racism can run, and subscribe to see how Maya navigates this dangerous turning point in her fight for justice. Will the mystery source provide the smoking gun evidence she needs? Or is Maya walking into an ambush orchestrated by Captain Reynolds? The answer might surprise you as our story continues. The abandoned Palmer printing building loomed in the darkness, its broken windows like blind eyes watching Maya as she approached the loading dock, her decision to come tempered by calculated precautions, a tracking app activated on her phone, with Marcus and Zoe monitoring her location from a nearby parking garage, a miniature recording device sewn into her jacket collar, and a private security team on standby 2 blocks away, ready to intervene at her signal. The rational part of her brain questioned her judgment in coming at all, but the investigator in her recognized that whistleblowers often required dramatic scenarios to feel secure, their paranoia usually justified by the risks they were taking. A figure emerged from the shadows as she reached the dock, an older white man in a rumpled suit, his gaunt face and yellowed complexion suggesting serious illness. "Judge Washington," he wheezed, his breath visible in the cold night air. "William." "Parker, 30 years with Chicago PD, the last 7 in internal affairs until my recent retirement. His bitter smile conveyed the euphemism. Lung cancer, terminal. Doctors give me weeks, maybe a month. The revelation explained both his appearance and his willingness to come forward, a man with nothing left to lose. "Why help me now?" Maya asked, maintaining a cautious distance. Parker's laugh dissolved into a coughing fit before he answered. "Deathbed conversion, you might call it. Amazing how facing your maker clarifies your moral compass." He passed her a weathered leather briefcase. "Everything you need is in there, and I mean everything." The contents of Parker's briefcase exceeded Maya's most optimistic expectations. Internal memos outlining the Community Correction Initiative, complete with a target list of successful black professionals in gentrifying neighborhoods, including Maya herself, marked for what the document chillingly termed attitude adjustment. More damning were audio recordings of planning meetings, where Captain Reynolds explicitly instructed officers to make targeted residents uncomfortable enough to consider relocating, with specific tactics including pretextual stops, delayed response times to emergency calls, and selective enforcement of minor violations. Financial documents revealed the program's connection to real estate developers who benefited from declining property values in targeted areas, purchasing properties at depressed prices before redevelopment. The conspiracy extended beyond the police department, implicating select prosecutors who declined to pursue misconduct cases and judges who reliably ruled in officers' favor, including, to Maya's profound shock, her mentor, Judge Sandra Morris, who had received vacation properties and consulting fees through shell companies connected to developer Victor Harrington. "Morris is their linchpin in the judiciary," Parker explained, his voice weakening as the night wore on. "She identifies which judges might be sympathetic to their cause and which ones need to be managed. You were flagged as unmanageable 3 months ago after you questioned excessive force in the Wilson case." Parker's revelations continued until nearly dawn, painting a picture of corruption more extensive and organized than Maya had imagined, a machine built over decades to maintain power structures while presenting a veneer of progress and reform. They agreed to meet again the following week to prepare his formal deposition, but 2 days later, Maya received word that Parker had died unexpectedly in his home, the official cause listed as complications from his cancer, despite his doctor's surprise at the sudden decline. The timing was suspicious enough to accelerate their timeline. Maya delivered copies of Parker's evidence to trusted contacts in the FBI and the Department of Justice, while Zoe published her second article revealing portions of the targeting program with carefully selected evidence that would stand up to scrutiny while protecting their remaining sources. The department's response was immediate and aggressive, launching a counter-campaign questioning Maya's mental stability, suggesting she had manufactured evidence in a delusional crusade stemming from trauma-induced paranoia after her encounter with Officer Dawson. The character assassination extended to her family when Marcus called, his voice tight with controlled fury. "They spray-painted racial slurs all over Mom's front porch. She's staying with me now." The escalation marked a new phase in the conflict, a desperate attempt to silence Maya through any means necessary. A call from the mayor's office the next day offered an apparent olive branch, a private settlement including a formal apology, sensitivity training for officers, and a policy review committee with Maya as a consultant, all contingent on her dropping any further investigation and signing a non-disclosure agreement. "This is your opportunity to effect real change without further disruption to the community," the mayor's chief of staff explained smoothly. "Everyone wins." Maya recognized the offer for what it was, a containment strategy designed to neutralize the threat while preserving the existing power structure. "I appreciate the mayor's concern," she replied diplomatically, "but real change requires public accountability, not private settlements." The rejection of their offer triggered another escalation. Captain Reynolds appeared on local morning news shows portraying himself as a dedicated public servant being persecuted by a judge with a personal agenda, his practiced sincerity convincing to viewers unaware of the evidence against him. Even Maya's former law professor and mentor, Judge Richard Hoffman, urged her to accept the settlement during a private lunch. "You've made your point, Maya, but this path leads nowhere good. These people have resources and connections you can't imagine. They'll destroy you before they allow themselves to be exposed." His concern seemed genuine, but his advice represented the same cautious approach that had allowed the system to perpetuate itself for generations. The balance shifted unexpectedly when Officer Kelly Martinez, despite her suspension and the threats against her, provided Zoe with internal training videos showing explicit racial bias in how officers were instructed to interact with residents. In different neighborhoods, respectful deference in wealthy white areas contrasting sharply with aggressive suspicion in areas with significant minority populations, even those with comparable income levels. The videos, impossible to dismiss as fabricated, caught national media attention as similar patterns emerged in other cities, transforming Maya's local investigation into a flashpoint for a national conversation about policing and race. As pressure mounted from multiple directions, Maya's phone rang with a number she immediately recognized, Officer Richard Dawson himself. "I think we need to talk, Judge Washington," he said, his tone lacking its usual arrogance. "I might be willing to make a deal. What would you do if you were in Maya's position? Would you trust Officer Dawson's sudden offer to cooperate? Or is this another trap in this dangerous game? Comment number 1 if you think this is a genuine opportunity to get insider testimony, or number 2 if you believe this is a setup designed to compromise her investigation. The evidence Maya has uncovered exposes corruption that reaches from street-level policing all the way to the mayor's office and wealthy developers. Like this video if you're shocked by the connections between policing, real estate development, and systematic displacement of black residents. Subscribe to see whether Maya can break through the blue wall of silence as this story reaches its most dangerous phase. Will Officer Dawson's unexpected offer provide the final piece of evidence Maya needs, or is he setting her up for the ultimate betrayal? The answer reveals just how far the conspiracy will go to protect itself. Maya selected the meeting location carefully, a glass-walled conference room at her brother's community center, visible from multiple angles, security cameras covering every approach, Marcus and 2 trusted colleagues positioned strategically throughout the building. Officer Richard Dawson arrived precisely on time, out of uniform, his usual swagger replaced by a subdued demeanor that might have been convincing if Maya hadn't spent 20 years reading people in her courtroom. "Thank you for agreeing to meet, Judge Washington," he began, hands folded on the table between them, voice pitched low with practiced contrition. "What happened that night? I was following protocols I'd been trained to implement. I'm not excusing my behavior, but there's a bigger picture you need to understand." Over the next hour, Dawson painted himself as a reluctant participant in a system he claimed to have gradually recognized as corrupt, describing Captain Reynolds as the true architect of the targeting program, a man who rewarded officers who implemented his vision and punished those who questioned his methods. "I can give you Reynolds," Dawson offered, leaning forward earnestly. "Dates, times, recordings of meetings where he explicitly outlined who to target and how. But I need protection, immunity from prosecution, and a transfer to another department." Maya maintained a neutral expression, the lawyer in her analyzing his offer while the judge evaluated his credibility. "I'd need to take this to the prosecutor's office," she said finally. "I can't personally guarantee immunity, but I can present your cooperation as a mitigating factor." Dawson nodded, seemingly satisfied with her response. "I want to make this right, Judge. I've been carrying this for too long." After Dawson left, Zoe arrived to review the recorded conversation, her journalist's skepticism evident in her furrowed brow. "Something feels off," she said, replaying sections of the recording. "He's too willing, too suddenly repentant. Let me dig into his background more deeply, before you take this to the prosecutor." Maya's brother Marcus was more blunt in his assessment. "You can't seriously be considering cutting a deal with the man who humiliated you, who's been terrorizing our community for years. He's playing you, Maya." Despite these reservations, Maya arranged a meeting with Helen Rivera, a senior prosecutor known for her integrity, presenting Dawson's offer as a potential breakthrough in exposing the broader conspiracy. If his information is as valuable as he claims, we might consider a cooperation agreement, Rivera said cautiously. But he'd need to provide verifiable evidence against higher-level targets, and his testimony would face intense scrutiny. Word of Maya's potential deal with Dawson leaked to the community, generating a wave of backlash from activists, including some of Marcus's closest allies. "They're saying you've sold out," he reported grimly after an emergency coalition meeting, "that you're sacrificing justice for a quick resolution that lets the worst offenders off the hook." The criticism stung, but Maya remained focused on her ultimate goal, systematic reform rather than individual punishment. As they prepared for Dawson's formal statement, Maya and Zoe uncovered connections they hadn't anticipated, evidence suggesting the targeting program was directly linked to Victor Harrington's real estate development company, which had acquired properties at below-market rates in exactly the neighborhoods where harassment had been most intense. Financial records showed massive profits as these same properties were redeveloped into luxury condominiums after the original residents had been driven out. The systematic displacement of black homeowners disguised as natural market evolution. More disturbing was the discovery that Judge Sandra Morris had received payments through a shell company connected to Harrington's business empire, explaining her consistent rulings in favor of the development company's interests and her pressure on Maya to let go of the investigation. The day of Dawson's official statement arrived with tension so thick it seemed to crackle in the air of the prosecutor's conference room. Maya, Rivera, and 2 FBI agents waited as Dawson was escorted in. His attorney, a high-priced lawyer Maya recognized from major corporate cases, by his side. The session began routinely, with Dawson repeating much of what he'd told Maya privately about the targeting program and Reynolds' role, but as questioning deepened, his demeanor subtly shifted. "To be clear," Rivera pressed, "you're stating that Captain Reynolds directly ordered you to target Judge Washington specifically." Dawson hesitated, glancing at his attorney before answering. "Actually, that's not accurate. The truth is, Judge, Washington approached me after the incident and suggested we could both benefit from an arrangement." The room fell silent as Dawson continued, his story transforming before their eyes. "She implied that if I provided testimony against Captain Reynolds, she would ensure favorable outcomes in cases involving officers I was friendly with. When I refused her initial approach, she began this investigation as retaliation. The betrayal was so brazen, so complete, that Maya momentarily lost her composure. "That's absolutely false," she stated, turning to Rivera and the FBI agents. "Every word of that is a fabrication." Dawson's attorney smoothly slid a folder across the table. "We anticipated this response. Inside you'll find recordings of conversations between Officer Dawson and Judge Washington that corroborate my client's account." The recordings, Maya realized with growing horror, were heavily edited versions of their meeting, her words rearranged, to create damning implications completely contrary to their actual conversations. Dawson had been wearing a wire, not to gather evidence against Reynolds, but to manufacture evidence against her. Rivera called for a break, escorting Maya to a private room. "This is a setup," Maya said immediately. "Those recordings have been doctored." The prosecutor's expression revealed nothing. "We'll have them analyzed, of course, but you should know that the department has filed a formal complaint with the Judicial Ethics Committee. They're seeking your immediate removal from the bench and potential criminal charges for judicial misconduct." The carefully orchestrated counterattack continued to unfold over the following days. Maya's legal team, fearing association with a now toxic case, withdrew their representation one by one. The Judicial Ethics Committee scheduled an emergency hearing based on the doctored recordings, and the FBI temporarily suspended their investigation into the department to focus on the allegations against Maya instead. Only Andrea and Marcus remained steadfastly loyal as colleagues and friends distanced themselves, the isolation a calculated part of the strategy to break her resolve. Zoe continued investigating despite increasing pressure on her newspaper, discovering that Captain Reynolds and Dawson had met with developer Victor Harrington the night before Dawson's betrayal at his private club, suggesting coordination at the highest levels of the conspiracy. The full weight of the system Maya had challenged now focused its considerable power on crushing her completely, her cases reassigned, her access to the courthouse restricted, her reputation systematically dismantled through strategic leaks and innuendo. Alone in her apartment that evening, surrounded by case files and evidence that now seemed insufficient against the machine arrayed against her, Maya noticed a strange reflection in her television screen when it was powered off, a tiny blinking light from the bookshelf opposite her desk. Careful inspection revealed a sophisticated surveillance camera disguised as a decorative object, professionally installed and nearly undetectable. Further search uncovered 4 more devices throughout her home office and living room, including an audio recorder beneath her desk. Maya's initial shock gave way to a sudden clarifying realization. If her home had been under surveillance, then everything that had happened there had been recorded, including her legitimate conversations with Dawson, proving the edited versions were fraudulent. More importantly, if she could access the surveillance system, she might find evidence of who had authorized the illegal monitoring and what they had captured in their efforts to spy on her. The very operation intended to destroy her might contain the evidence that would save her and expose the entire conspiracy in the process. Maya's hands trembled slightly, with a combination of rage and vindication, as she stared at the surveillance devices hidden throughout her home. The invasion of her privacy now transformed into potential salvation if she could access the recorded footage that would prove Dawson's betrayal and her own innocence. Rather than removing the devices, she left them in place and contacted Darius Wells, a cybersecurity expert who had previously consulted on digital evidence cases in her courtroom, arranging to meet him at a coffee shop far from her usual haunts. "These aren't amateur devices," Darius confirmed after viewing the photographs Maya had carefully taken without alerting the cameras. "We're talking about professional-grade surveillance equipment, likely connected to a remote server, rather than storing data locally. The good news is they probably kept everything they recorded. People who go to these lengths typically want comprehensive monitoring." Working methodically from Maya's brother's apartment to avoid the surveillance at her home, Darius traced the digital signature of the devices, discovering they operated on a secured network linked to a private security company, Black River Solutions, which advertised executive protection and intelligence services to corporate and government clients. Further investigation revealed Black River had received substantial payments from both the police department's discretionary fund and Harrington Ventures over the past year. "They've been monitoring you comprehensively," Darius explained, showing Maya evidence of surveillance extending beyond her apartment to include her office, her car, and even her regular coffee shop. "But their overconfidence is our opportunity. Their network security is impressive, but not impenetrable, especially since we know exactly what we're looking for." After 3 days of careful work, Darius successfully accessed the surveillance archive, revealing hundreds of hours of recordings from Maya's home and office, including the unedited conversation with Dawson that directly contradicted his fabricated testimony. More significantly, they discovered recordings of Captain Reynolds and Victor Harrington meeting in Maya's office after hours, Reynolds explicitly mentioning the surveillance system as he updated Harrington on their efforts to discredit her. "We need to move carefully," Maya cautioned as they reviewed the explosive evidence. "They clearly have allies throughout the system, including judges who should be recused from any case involving this matter." The surveillance footage provided the key to understanding the conspiracy's full scope. Harrington's development company had targeted 5 predominantly black neighborhoods for revitalization, working with Captain Reynolds to implement the harassment campaign that drove property values down and forced longtime residents to sell at losses. Internal communications revealed the program had displaced over 300 black families over 3 years, generating nearly $70 million in profit when the properties were redeveloped and sold to wealthy white buyers. The corruption extended through multiple levels of city government, with Chief Justice Peterson himself appearing in one recording, assuring Harrington that he would handle the Washington situation in exchange for support for his son's political campaign. Andrea made another critical discovery while reviewing court records, a pattern of cases where Judge Morris had ruled in favor of Harrington's company in disputed property matters, coinciding with payments to her through consulting firms that provided no actual services. With this comprehensive evidence in hand, Maya developed a new strategy that bypassed the corrupted criminal justice channels, filing an emergency federal civil rights lawsuit naming the entire police command structure, their judicial accomplices, and Harrington's development company as participants in a criminal conspiracy to violate the civil rights of targeted black residents through official police action. The legal maneuver caught the conspirators off guard. They had prepared for a criminal defense centered on discrediting Maya personally, not a civil rights case with broader implications and federal jurisdiction that removed it from their sphere of influence. Judge Wilson emerged from retirement once more, this time to represent Maya in the disciplinary proceedings initiated against her, his distinguished reputation providing a shield against the most egregious attacks on her credibility. "I've reviewed the unedited surveillance footage," he announced during the preliminary hearing, "and I am prepared to testify that the evidence presented against Judge Washington was deliberately falsified as part of a criminal conspiracy that reaches the highest levels of this court." His bombshell statement caused an immediate recess as the Ethics Committee members, several of whom had connections to Judge Morris, suddenly faced potential implication in the widening scandal. Zoe published her most comprehensive article yet, methodically outlining the connections between the police department, the development company, and corrupted judicial officials, supported by carefully selected evidence from the surveillance footage that couldn't be dismissed as fabrication. The public response was immediate and overwhelming, with protests forming outside police headquarters and the courthouse demanding independent investigation and accountability. The pressure intensified when Bethany Reynolds, Captain Reynolds' wife, came forward publicly, confirming her husband's involvement in the harassment program and years of covering up misconduct. "I've been afraid to speak out for so long," she admitted in a televised interview, bruises visible on her arms despite attempted concealment with makeup. "James said he would destroy me if I ever betrayed him, and I believed him because I've seen what he does to people who cross him." Her testimony included specific instances of evidence tampering and witness intimidation she had personally witnessed, adding critical corroboration to Maya's allegations. The conspiracy began to unravel as participants turned against each other. In attempts to secure leniency, Officer Martinez provided additional testimony about training practices. Another judge admitted to receiving improper payments from Harrington, and a mid-level manager from the development company turned whistleblower, with documentation of the property acquisition strategy explicitly targeting black homeowners. Maya's suspension created an unexpected advantage. Freed from the constraints of her judicial position, she was able to testify as a private citizen about her experiences, bringing her legal expertise and personal testimony together in a powerful combination that resonated with the public and the media. The FBI, responding to mounting evidence and public pressure, launched a formal investigation into civil rights violations and racketeering charges against the core conspiracy members. Victor Harrington attempted to flee the country, but was detained at O'Hare International Airport with over $2 million in cash and jewelry in his luggage, his hasty escape attempt only adding to the appearance of guilt. Captain Reynolds, seeing the collapse of their carefully constructed system, turned on Officer Dawson, offering competing testimony in a desperate attempt to secure a more favorable position for himself. Dawson was the primary contact with targeted individuals, he claimed in a sworn statement. He developed the profile criteria and selected residents for special attention based on his own prejudices. The former allies now engaged in mutual accusation, each revelation exposing more details of the conspiracy's operation and reach. As the federal investigation accelerated, Maya received an unexpected call from Supreme Court Justice Eleanor Williams, her former law school mentor, who had followed her career with interest from Washington. "I've been watching what's unfolding in Chicago with great concern," Williams said, her normally reserved tone warmed by obvious admiration. "You've demonstrated extraordinary courage in the face of systemic corruption, Maya. I'm calling to let you know that I've spoken with the Chief Justice of the Federal District Court. He's personally overseeing the hearing on your civil rights case, and I'll be attending as an observer. This has implications far beyond Chicago, and we want to ensure the proceedings receive the attention and legitimacy they deserve. The support from the highest levels of the judiciary sent an unmistakable message to the remaining conspirators. The protective systems they had relied upon were crumbling, and accountability was becoming inevitable. Maya's professional vindication was beginning to take shape, but the deeper victory, exposing the mechanisms of institutional racism and forcing systematic change, remained the ultimate goal as the case moved toward its final confrontation. The imposing architecture of the federal courthouse gleamed in the morning sunlight as Maya ascended the steps, the crowd of supporters and media parting to create a path, their presence both protective and energizing after months of isolation and battle. Inside, the grand courtroom buzzed with tension and anticipation. National civil rights leaders, seated alongside local community members, law enforcement officials uncomfortably avoiding eye contact with defendants, Supreme Court Justice Williams' presence in the observer section, lending historic weight to proceedings that had transcended a personal vindication to become a watershed moment for police accountability. Maya took her unprecedented dual role as primary plaintiff and legal strategist with the gravity it deserved, her opening statement connecting her personal experience to the broader patterns of discrimination that had devastated communities across Chicago. "This case is not about one incident or one officer," she began, her voice steady and clear in the hushed courtroom. "It is about a systematic effort to weaponize law enforcement against black citizens who dared to succeed in spaces others believed they should not occupy. It is about the corruption of institutions designed to protect all citizens, transformed instead into instruments of oppression and profit." Over the following days, victim after victim took the stand. The cardiologist handcuffed in her hospital parking lot, the professor made to lie face down on the sidewalk while students watched, the small business owner whose shop was repeatedly raided on fabricated anonymous tips until he was forced to close. Their collective testimony created a tapestry of deliberate harassment, too consistent to dismiss, too widespread to attribute to coincidence or individual bias. The courtroom fell completely silent when elderly Mrs. Johnson testified about experiencing identical treatment in the 1960s, drawing a direct line between historical discrimination and present practices. "Nothing changed except they got more clever about hiding it," she observed, her dignity undiminished by age. "Same purpose, different methods. Keep us in our place or drive us out." The case's turning point came unexpectedly when Judge Sandra Morris requested to testify, her once immaculate appearance now strained by weeks of scrutiny and isolation. "I began with small compromises," she admitted, her voice barely audible in the silent courtroom. "Favorable rulings on zoning variances in exchange for donations to judicial campaigns. Property disputes settled quietly with generous terms for preferred developers. I told myself it was just politics, just how the system worked." Her testimony detailed a years-long progression from minor ethical violations to full participation in the conspiracy, including her role in identifying judges who might pose threats to the operation. I recommended adding Maya to the surveillance list after she questioned excessive force statistics during a quarterly review. She couldn't be influenced or intimidated through normal channels, which made her dangerous to the entire arrangement. The courtroom erupted when Victor Harrington's complete financial records were entered into evidence, revealing the targeting program extended beyond Chicago to 6 other major cities, each showing identical patterns of police harassment, followed by property devaluation and acquisition. The systematic displacement of black communities wasn't a side effect, but the explicit purpose of the program, designed to accelerate gentrification while maintaining plausible deniability about racial motivation. Maya's own testimony on the final day brought together the personal and systemic dimensions of the case, her legal training and lived experience, creating a narrative that was simultaneously analytical and deeply human. "When those handcuffs cut into my wrists, I experienced what thousands of my fellow citizens have endured without the protections my position afforded me, she told the packed courtroom. The difference is not that I was targeted, but that I had the resources and platform to fight back. This case seeks justice, not just for those with power and voice, but for everyone who has been silenced by a system designed to protect privilege rather than people. As the federal judge announced his ruling, the courtroom held its collective breath. The evidence presented in this case reveals a disturbing pattern of coordinated civil rights violations implemented through official channels and for private gain. He began, his expression grave. The court finds in favor of the plaintiffs on all counts and orders the following remedies, effective immediately. The sweeping judgment mandated federal oversight of the Chicago Police Department for a minimum of 5 years, required the immediate implementation of comprehensive reforms in training, supervision, and accountability mechanisms, and ordered the creation of a $30 million restitution fund for victims of documented harassment. Criminal referrals were issued for Captain Reynolds, Officer Dawson, and 7 other officers directly implicated in carrying out the targeting program, along with Victor Harrington and 2 other developers who had financed and profited from the scheme. Standing on the courthouse steps after the verdict, Maya addressed the assembled crowd and cameras with measured optimism. Today marks a beginning, not an end. Real justice requires not just accountability for past wrongs, but transformation of the systems that permitted those wrongs to occur. That work continues beyond this courtroom, in every neighborhood, every precinct, every institution where power must be balanced with responsibility and privilege with justice. The months following the verdict brought both vindication and new purpose. Maya established a legal clinic specializing in representing victims of similar discrimination nationwide, creating a model for challenging systemic racism through targeted civil litigation. Her expertise and experience led to an invitation to help draft new federal legislation, establishing national standards for police accountability and civilian oversight, bringing structural reforms beyond Chicago to departments across the country. 6 months after the verdict, Maya returned to the bench, walking through the courthouse to a standing ovation from staff who had witnessed her journey from target to transformative force. Andrea was appointed to lead the newly established Civilian Police Oversight Committee, bringing her organizational skills and unwavering integrity to the critical work of rebuilding community trust in law enforcement. Maya and Zoe received the Pulitzer Prize for their investigation, the prestigious award, acknowledging not just their journalistic achievement, but the profound impact of their work on national policy and public discourse. In her most meaningful professional moment, Maya presided over the swearing-in ceremony for a new class of police officers trained under the reformed program, their diverse faces reflecting the communities they would serve, their oath emphasizing protection of constitutional rights alongside public safety. Officer Martinez, reinstated and promoted to training supervisor, stood proudly among the program leaders, her early courage in speaking out, now recognized as the standard to which all officers should aspire. After the ceremony, Maya drove alone to Graceland Cemetery, making her way to her father's grave with deliberate steps. She placed her gavel beside his headstone, running her fingers over his name as tears finally came, not of sorrow or even triumph, but of recognition for the continuum of struggle and progress that connected his work to hers. "We're not done yet," she whispered, "but we've made a start." Standing in that quiet place of remembrance, Maya Washington understood that true justice was neither a verdict nor a policy, but an ongoing commitment to transform the world as it is into the world as it should be. A commitment renewed with every case, every law, every courageous stand against the forces that would divide humanity by the accidents of birth and circumstance. The handcuffs that had once cut into her wrists had become the catalyst for change that would protect generations to come, not because she had suffered, but because she had transformed that suffering into action. What would you do if you witnessed discrimination in your community? Would you have the courage to stand up like Maya even when facing powerful opposition? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below about how we can all work toward creating more just systems. If this story of courage, persistence, and systemic change resonated with you, Please like this video to help it reach others who need to hear this message. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful true stories of justice and transformation, and share this video with someone who might be inspired by Maya's journey. Thank you for joining me on this exploration of how one person's refusal to accept injustice can create ripples of change that transform entire systems. Until next time, remember that justice requires both vigilance and hope. This story illustrates that systemic change requires more than identifying individual bad actors. It demands exposing the entire ecosystem that enables discrimination to flourish. Judge Washington's journey teaches us that positions of privilege come with responsibility. When she experienced firsthand what countless others endured without protection, she used her power to create change rather than seeking personal vindication alone. The story demonstrates how racism often operates through seemingly neutral systems, policing, real estate, courts, working in concert to maintain existing power structures while providing plausible deniability. It shows that genuine allies, willing to risk their comfort and safety, are essential in dismantling entrenched systems of oppression. Perhaps most importantly, Maya's story reveals that documentation and evidence gathering are crucial weapons against gaslighting and denial. The patterns of discrimination became undeniable when methodically compiled and presented. Finally, we learn that true justice is never a single verdict or policy change, but an ongoing commitment to transform institutions from instruments of oppression into protectors of equal rights. The path to systemic change is fraught with retaliation and personal cost, but remaining silent in the face of injustice ultimately costs society even more. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and wondered if one person could really make a difference? Maya's story shows that courage, persistence, and strategic action can transform even the most entrenched systems. What small step could you take today to challenge unfairness in your community? Drop a comment below sharing a time when you stood up against injustice or what inspires you to do so. If this story of transformation resonated with you, please hit that like button to help amplify these important conversations about systemic change. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful narratives that explore how justice can be reimagined and systems rebuilt. And if you know someone who's fighting their own battle against discrimination or needs inspiration to start, share this video with them as a reminder that they're not alone. Thank you for joining us in examining how courage in the face of injustice can create ripples that ultimately transform society. May we all find the strength to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult.